name is Roland Danreiter, and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor here, Student Experience. And it is really my great pleasure to welcome you all to this professorial lecture by Dibyesh Anand on the topic of queering nations, decolonising states. It is a particular pleasure for me, as I've known Dibyesh for many years, not just as a colleague, but also as a friend. And to give a professorial lecture, or what is sometimes called an inaugural lecture, is an important rite of passage and is one of the pinnacles of academic achievement. It is a moment where we can hear what Dibyesh professes as a professor, and where we can celebrate with him his academic life and career, which has culminated in the distinction of the award of the title of professor. The title is not lightly given. It involves a very rigorous process, including external as well as internal referees, who have to determine whether the candidate has made an outstanding contribution through research and scholarly activity to the advancement of their subject. Dibyesh's research is certainly and unquestionably outstanding. Since his seminal book published in 2007, Geopolitical Exotica, Tibet in the Western Imagination, Dibyesh has become a leading international scholar on Tibetan issues. His book provided a path-breaking post-colonial critique of the colonial practices that shaped Tibet as an international problem, and his analysis engaged with the politics of identity and representation in the Tibetan diaspora. The many articles and book chapters that have evolved from this research not only engage with Tibetan exiles, but also with China's public diplomacy towards Tibet. Dibyesh is perhaps unique in being both a friend of the Dalai Lama and also being invited to discuss Tibetan issues in Beijing. And it was one of the great occasions of this university when the Dalai Lama, at the invitation and instigation of Dibyesh, visited us to talk to staff and students in 2012 in this very auditorium. This interest in Tibet is closely linked to a second area of his research, which is about broader cooperative and competitive relations between China and India. This extends beyond Tibet to include other issues in the Himalayan region, especially Bhutan and Kashmir. He is an acknowledged scholar on these regions as well. Dibyesh has also worked extensively on right-wing majoritarian nationalism in India, and this resulted in the book Hindu Nationalism in India and the Politics of Fear. He conceptualized Hindu nationalism as a form of porno-nationalism, and as being a major threat to the secular idea of India as a democracy, particularly due to the promotion of violence. As you can see from this extensive body of work, Dibyesh is not afraid to take on some of the most sensitive national and international issues, and to speak truth to power. His research has also a direct connection and empathy with those who are marginalised, suppressed, who suffer dispossession and occupation. Dibyesh, I know, does not see a radical difference between his formal academic research and his Facebook page, which has many thousands of followers, in fact almost too many to actually fit on the page. Dibyesh's scholarship is one which seeks to make an impact, and this was explicitly recognised by the Research Excellence Framework through its case study being judged of international significance and reach. Dibyesh's commitment to public engagement is also matched by his commitment to his students. A number of the audience here have had the great experience of being PhD students under Dibyesh's supervision. I'd also like to say that I was personally delighted when I stepped down as head of Department of Politics and International Relations in 2013 that Dibyesh took over from me. Under Dibyesh's leadership, the department has gone from strength to strength, maintaining both its critical research reputation and its being a place where students are engaged, challenged, and are given the opportunity to fulfil their full potential. I don't think there is any other department which has the same number of public events and lectures, foreign study trips and placements. And this is very much due to the inspiration and dedication of Dibyesh. So for all these multiple reasons, his outstanding research, his public engagement, and his commitment to students, I'm delighted to now pass on to Dibyesh to present his professorial lecture on queering nations, Decolonising States.
Thank you, Roland. In fact, Roland covered a lot of things that I wanted to cover in terms of giving trajectory of my own research and career. But thanks a lot for your kind words. And in terms of course, I thought I'll start with, my first slide was actually this. Why are we here? And you know why you're here. You're here to listen to me. Now, of course, this is from 1834, the quote, not Leonardo, he's not from 1834. So I wanted to, in fact, thank fellow men for inspiring me and being here on a day that you could have spent maybe partying around, for Halloween. Also, when I say fellow men, you'd notice that I'm excluding large sections of you. So, what we have learned, and I remember growing up and using the word man is a word man or men. So man is a social animal. So I'd use man for everyone. And I'm sure many of us did that in the past. Then through education we learn and we realize how words exclude people. Right? For instance, of course, we learned, say, ladies and gentlemen. So on that note, let me welcome you all, ladies and gentlemen, on this particular date to come and listen to me. Now, of course, we realize by using the word ladies and gentlemen, we still exclude human beings. Human beings who may not associate directly as a woman or man. Right? So in that context, of course, ladies and gentlemen, anyway, there's a class issue there. So let me not talk of class issue here, but just focus on the ways in which even terms where we think we are being inclusive by saying ladies and gentlemen, we still exclude people. We exclude human beings who don't identify either as men and women. Now again, this is not about being politically correct. It is about being sensitive around the ways in which our language, our ideas, and our practices exclude human beings. So I myself only 2 years ago realized that the correct pronunciation, there's no agreement on what the correct pronunciation should be, but just saying he/she, she, I still am excluding people. So they might be a better term to use. So I've tried to practice that in my own language, where rather than even using the word he, she, I usually would use the word they. It's not very easy, but it's not that difficult. The reality is part and parcel of education, part and parcel of learning is to be aware of our own politics of exclusion and inclusion. And through my own work, I've tried to look at that. Of course, we still exclude here, because if I say dear fellow human beings, I'm still excluding someone, maybe you're not here. Let's say other sentient beings who would not be human beings. Let's ignore other sentient beings for the time being. Now, Roland did stress me out a few days ago when he said, have you written down your speech? And then he said, it's a very formal occasion and you are supposed to write down. I tried to write down something and I wrote 4.5 pages. It's still there, but I haven't read it and I couldn't manage. Part of the problem is because over time, it's not that I can't write. If I couldn't have written, then I wouldn't be here. I can write. But when it comes to engaging with audience and engaging with people who are from diverse backgrounds, so some academics, some students, some non-academics, some activists, and I know that possibly it's also being Facebook live, and therefore I have friends watching in other parts of the world who would not be academics or students at all. I've learned that sometimes it's better to pay attention to the audience. And if I read, I can't pay attention to the audience. So I'm not making judgment about people who read. We all have a different styles. But I struggle with it. So I'm only now, and half an hour earlier when Roland met me outside, he said, it's okay, don't stress, don't read. You can be yourself. That was only half an hour ago. Now, but in that case, and of course, an hour ago before that, Andrew, my dean, he also had something similar, I hope you're prepared kind of thing. So yes, I'm prepared. I've got a lot of images here, so at least I'm prepared. And images, slides from, there are 50 slides by the way. So you have to get used to watching me, and I'm in most of the slides. Now, a lot of time, and the way I see myself, and I'm sure you do it too, is that we have our own fantasies why we are here. We are here, for instance, I joined academia not because I saw it as a career. I joined academia while hoping and thinking that I'm some sort of an activist, some sort of revolutionary. So I still have that impulse in me. Not of real revolution, because I haven't done any revolution, right? So it's about that. So there's a fantasy aspect to it. But the harsh reality within universities, we are dealing with bureaucratize knowledge. So when Roland said, for instance, that he was glad I took over the head of department, I should say he prompted me to or encouraged me to take over the head of department, and later at one time when I couldn't or I had the opportunity of not continuing, then I had Andrew saying, maybe you should continue, or rather you should continue. So it's not that I wanted to do it, but I was encouraged to do it, and I fell into the trap of it. That's it. But frankly, I don't regret, and I'll explain to you why I don't regret it. So we can critique bureaucratization of knowledge, we can critique commercialization of knowledge, and we do, and I do the same. But the reality is that through my own role as head of department, as well as, let's say, professor, I think or rather, not I have managed to, but I'm trying to manage to balance different things. So having that position within the university, or having just being a professor or an academic, when I say professor, I don't mean necessarily professor, I mean lecturer, for instance, right, and university academic. It allows us certain freedoms which we won't have if we were not part of the university. And so for me, therefore, it's largely negotiating my own space within the structure, while also having a fantasy that somehow I'm also against the structure. I said fantasy. Now, my talk, that's me by the way, that's the first photograph of me. And I realized that I had chocolate, someone gave me chocolate, I don't know who gave it to me, and I was pouting myself, right, pouting. Now, the thing is, the way I would give a talk today is around autoethnography. So I would go through my own journey and link it with the idea that I've explored. And hopefully it would also make sense to you. That now the problem with autoethnography can be, it's narcissistic, it's all about me. It is about me. But the way I would see it, and many of you would realize, is that even when we don't think it's about us, even when we say, don't have I when you give your talk, don't have I when you do your research, the reality is the I is very much there. But we mask that I, we mask that subjectivity through a garb of objectivity. But as postmodern, postcolonial, feminist, and other theories have shown that there is no objectivity. It's spuriously objectivity at best. So I'm very much present here in my own life. So it's therefore, my talk is not only about from how I was a child, I'm not going to talk about my childhood, I don't remember much frankly, to now when I came out as queer, so it's not about that. But the risk with this kind of approach is of course very clear. How would you challenge me? Because if you challenge me, then you challenge me personally also. So for instance, if I identify and put forward certain political ideas based on a personal identity, and you want to question that political idea, you may hesitate a bit, because you think by questioning his political idea, we're questioning his personal identity. That's a risk with autoethnography kind of work. But I still indulge in it. The first kind of work I did was, and I'm often driven by various emotions, so I'm trying to figure out what emotions have driven me. So in a way, this lecture was useful for me because it also forced me to think about myself, and I've thought about I've also dreamt about it, by the way. Most of the dreams I was stressed. Now, curiosity. So first major work, which was also my PhD, and then from the book was around curiosity around Tibet. I came to England 20 years ago in 1997 to do my master's, and I remember there was a lot of fascination with an exoticization of Tibetans and the Dalai Lama. Now I was studying before that in Delhi, and there was a Tibetan settlement near our university. I had gone there because my friends would go there to drink. When I say drink, I don't mean drink water, but drink alcohol. Now, so they went to drink alcohol. I wasn't, well, I'm not alcoholic even now, but I didn't drink there. So I would go and have momos. So the image of Tibetans I had was momos, and that's it, nothing else. Dalai Lama had visited my college then, and I remember not going to listen to him because I was hungry and I wanted to have omelette somehow. So I didn't go and listen to him because for me, Tibetans, or for that matter, Dalai Lama had no currency. Remember coming here in 1997, that's a year when 7 Years in Tibet came out. That's the year when Kundun came out. And I remember various protests when Chinese president or leaders would visit here, various protests around it. So it was a curiosity about how come I didn't know anything about it. And there's so much of fascination. And when I didn't know, I also knew that in India generally there's a lack of awareness around Tibet, where Tibetans live in exile, most of them. How come I didn't know anything, and there are people here in the West who are so curious, so passionate, and so fascinated by Tibet? So that's how it started. So it's about our curiosity. And of course, it resulted in this book. Of course, the journey between the research, or the start of research, and the book was of 9 years. So it's not short research. But what essentially found out and argued was that exoticization of Tibetans helps Tibetans to an extent, but largely hinders the political movement. So exoticization of Tibetans as peaceful, peace-loving, almost cuddly kind of people implies that they can't explore non-violent means of resistance. Right or wrong, that's the harsh reality. So Western exoticization limits the ways in which Tibetans can politically express themselves. And second aspect of this book was the ways in which the debate over sovereignty. Does China have sovereignty over Tibet? That's the key debate. And China says that it has sovereignty. Even that debate has been shaped through Western imagination and Western representation. Because, and the British played a crucial role, and you can trust the British imperials of messing up everywhere in the world, so Tibet is no exception. Though they didn't colonize it directly. The British represented Tibetans primarily as very religious-oriented people. And because they were very religiously oriented people, they had no conception of state or self-determination. The reality is, when you study it, that Tibetans had their own state. But the British didn't want to recognize that state as a modern state. It was a traditional state, based on other principles. Now, rather than recognizing that the state was based on other principles, and we should respect it, the British delegitimized that notion of statehood for their own politics, and I'll not go into detail here. China benefited from that representation. China or Chinese nationalism will claim that it is the victim of Western imperialism, but the Chinese state is the biggest beneficiary of British and Western imperialism in Tibet. So they took up the idea that the British had and took it upon themselves, saying that Tibetans are not fit to govern themselves, will govern them on their behalf because they are people who are weak, who are spiritual, who are religious, and not political. So that's the kind of work I did. The second major work I did was prompted by rage. In 2002, in western state of India, in Gujarat, that's the state, at that time the reports said that up to 2,000 people were killed. 2,000, mostly Muslims were killed. Now the figure has been reduced to around 1,000. I said around 1,000 because of course there are competing claims over this. And I recall very distinctly that my own, let's say, distant relatives, not necessarily close relatives, thankfully, distant relatives and others would say Muslims asked for it. There was an overwhelming sense among the upper and middle class Hindu Indians that Muslims asked for this violence. So I was very much intrigued by it and disturbed by it, and of course angry with it. But rather than focusing on critics of Hindu nationalists, I went and spent a lot of time with Hindu nationalists themselves. Those who claim that India should be Hindu because it's Hindu majority, and those who claim that India being secular is somehow a problem. So I spent a lot of time, and most of the people I spent time with were the right-wing Hindu fascists, and that's how they were, fascists. And the research was tricky because, of course, I didn't lie to them. I couldn't lie that I'm your supporter. But they assume I was their supporter. I didn't clarify it. And the reason for that is very simple. My own name would indicate that I'm not a Muslim, I'm Hindu. And if I use my father and mother's surname, family name, then they'd assume it's a Brahminical surname. So they'd always assume that let's say a middle class, non-resident Hindu Indian would necessarily be pro-fascist. And this has to be kept in mind. So they assume that I would be a natural sympathizer for them. I only said that I wanted to find out why do they do what they do. And I said that largely the left wing criticizes you, so I want to find out what's your thinking. And I was young then, when I was doing research, or rather I looked younger than I was. So a lot of my research, let's say, I don't want to use the word informant, but people I would interact with would be young men. So this whole idea, I didn't go with gender, sexuality question in mind, by the way. I didn't. I just was curious, how do they justify this level of extreme violence to themselves, forget to others? And the broader argument I make there, and which came out in the book, again, it took me long years to write this book, and when I was very disturbed around it also, was that the way they would justify is that Hindu nation, Hindu the majority, 82% of population by the way, Hindus face a lot of enemies, Muslims, Christians, secularists, communists, and westernized media. Right? So they are enemies. Then the notion is you first tackle the Muslims, and then you tackle the Christians, and then you tackle the communists, 3 of them, and then secularists would anyway then give up. But you start with Muslims. And so I looked in my work, how would Muslims through stereotypes, through representations, be dehumanized? So I don't remember using the word dehumanization before that, but through that I could see that the process was of dehumanization. By portraying Muslims as terrorists, as overpopulating, as inimical, as rapists, and these are the different imaginations and representations, Muslims were dehumanized. So I looked at the ways in which there was a generation of politics of fear amongst Hindus through selective representations of Muslims and Christians. So that's how it was. And porno nationalism, because those representations were deeply sexualized and violently pornographic. Okay? You can read my book anyway, it's there if you want to read it. And by now my language had changed. When I say language had changed, because when I did this book, Geopolitical Exotica, it uses all different kinds of theories. If you're an activist, even if you're a Tibetan activist, you might struggle to understand what I'm writing because I'm using a language which is very academic. By now, I was writing in language which is very scholarly but not academic. Partly because I wanted to influence the public debate around these things. And I recall even well-intentioned friends and even the referees, by the way, for the book saying that what you're saying is an exaggeration. It can't be. Of course, a few years later, by now, that these very actors are now in power. And it's much worse than what I had written about. Right? Now, so in both these cases, the commonality was around how the ways in which representation of the other goes hand in hand with securitization of the self. Right? So security is a discourse through which the other gets represented as dangerous, and then you come up with an identity politics of the self which defends itself against the other. So you justify all kinds of violence against the other through those representations. So common themes were therefore representation, identity, and violence. They were the common themes. Now, 2008, and I'm sure many of you would have faced it, and I know I've met some of you you're starting your PhD and you're asking me about my journey. The reality often we are dictated not by what we are interested in, but what happens out in the outside world. So while I was still writing my Hindu nationalism book, 2008 protests took place in Tibet. Large-scale, massive protests took place in Chinese-occupied Tibet. And by then I was in London, and I remember it was BBC Newsnight, who asked me for an interview on this. Until then I had spoken on Islam channel on Rohingya issue as well as on Uyghurs. But I wasn't, very familiar with the media. And the struggle we have with academics, we don't know when to stop. Now with Islam channel, the advantage was hardly anyone watched it, and it would be almost 10 minutes to half an hour of interviews. I could go on and on and on, right? Now with the Newsnight, I remember them telling me we have got exact 5 minutes. So I thought, oh gosh, how am I going to explain everything in 5 minutes? But I had to do it. Now, in one sense, I put expertise with question mark because I would not like to see myself as an expert on anything because we know the politics of expertise is quite problematic. But at the same time, I also knew that if I don't speak to the media, they will get someone else in any case. And those someone else, or that someone else, might not have the same kind of empathy that I have for Tibetan cause. Right? They will pretend to be objective when in reality they are status quoist. And I can pretend to be objective while my empathy is with Tibetans. Right? So that's the narrative I adopted. So I would sometimes selectively use my expertise when I felt that it's good for the cause I believed in. But what it forced me, and since then, let's say I've been on various news channels from time to time, and I always ask, how many minutes do I have? And I think I can't say I have become expert in speaking to the media, but I think I've improved over time. But we know that with media they needed 2 minutes, 30 seconds, 40 minutes, or not 40 minutes, sorry, 3 minutes or whatever, and you have to make your point within that. I learned that. So I learned that language. Now that's not a language of academics, because as I said, we can go on and we can use all kinds of theories, we can talk of radical things, but without coming across radical when we are talking to the media. So I thought I learned with that. But it also coincided with the interest that, for instance, some Chinese officials took in my research. Now it was not flattering because I'm very critical of China and I call China a colonial power in Tibet, but it was flattering still because of course they wanted to listen to me and everything, and it started with an event at Chatham House. There was an event where there were very senior Chinese scholars / officials. Bear this in mind, most scholars in China around Tibet are officials, right? So there's no division between them. They were here and they had invited all Tibet-related scholars from the UK for that event. I recall distinctly that no one, apart from me and another person, raised any question that was critical. Most Tibet scholars, not Tibetan, Tibet scholars kept quiet. They were my colleagues, my comrades, and a comrade in terms of Tibetan studies. They kept quiet, and my own understanding of it is, it's all to do with self-censorship. And you know that if you are very critical of China, you may not get visa to go to China. It happened to me, by the way, from 2012 onwards. But not at this time. But I was slightly questioning and critical, and it raised interest, and then I was invited to Beijing because of my work on British imperialism in Tibet. That suited Chinese interests, by the way, critiquing British imperialism. I went there, I visited Tibet. I had the fortune of visiting Tibet a few times. I said fortune because many Tibetans in exile, they can never go back to Tibet. That's a harsh reality. But I never wrote about that. So none of my research derives from, or research writing derives from what I saw in Tibet. For a very simple reason. Because the moment I write about it, Chinese as well as Tibetan officials who hosted me would be in trouble. So I don't write about it. Now, so I allowed those visits to shape my understanding, but I would never use it in ethnographic terms. But what interested me there, of course, was the ways in which China wants the wider world to see Tibet. And they use the term China's Tibet. I put the question mark, they don't put the question mark. Now, of course, if you make that presentation, they remove the question mark. It had happened to me in Beijing once. I had put China and something, and Tibet, they said, no, China and Tibet are not separate, you have to put them together. Now this is the picture, a photo I took, and they were Chinese leaders, of course, worshipped in Tibet. So my interest and my work was on how Chinese public diplomacy functions to make the world believe that Tibet is Chinese. And what I found was various contradictions. A basic contradiction would be that Tibet, remember, the language is of liberation. China has liberated Tibet. That's a language. And yet, everything wrong before 1951 in Tibet was the fault of the Dalai Lamas. Now, my point is, so China has liberated Tibet, but China has always had Tibet. So they would say that Tibet has been part of motherland of China for thousands of years. So the argument is very clear that if Tibet was always part of China, then everything wrong in Tibet is China's responsibility. But the way Chinese narrative functions is that Tibet belongs to China, regardless of what Tibetans want and feel, and yet everything wrong in old Tibet was fault of the Dalai Lamas and the Lama system. So there were various kinds of contradictions I found. I never managed to finish writing that part, and this was a book that was supposed to be there. I think it's now postponed over endless years because I could never finish that book, right? But part of it, that sometimes we undertake certain journey and we don't finish it, which is sad because I want to finish that, so maybe it will take me time. But what I realized, of course, was through this, that China is a colonial power. See, when I was doing the geopolitical exotica Western imagination, I never saw China as a colonial power, though it was very much there. Imagine, I was doing a post-colonial analysis of Western imagination of Tibet, but I didn't even think of how a similar analysis of Chinese imagination of Tibet would show to me that China is colonial power. I didn't even think of it then. It took me time. But as I said, I also like to interact with the leaders, the scholars, but also wanted to make it more public. So we had, as Roland pointed out, His Holiness the Dalai Lama coming here. This was the place where he came. And I remember there were around 4,000 people expressing interest, and we had only seats for around 250 or 300, I don't know. But that was one where people who booked the ticket, they came. Right? It was there. Now, the challenge, of course, one finds is that I have empathy for Tibetans, but at the same time also try to keep distance. So my questions, if you watch it on YouTube, you'll find that I'm also serious in terms of questioning His Holiness himself in the past. And it's very difficult to question Dalai Lama, because when you sit with him, he holds your hand. And then you can't be very critical of him when he's holding your hand, because for him, what is Dalai Lama? That's the important part, right? And remember, for us, for you, most of you, it might not be that significant. For Tibetans, particularly Tibetans in Tibet, the life is taken away, or the freedom is taken away just because they worship the Dalai Lama. So it's an important thing to keep in mind, right? But through my broadly India work and China work, and through my work on China's Tibet, what I noticed was a certain issue that was connected again, about which I had not thought of in the past, which was the border dispute between China and India. Basically, China and India, two emerging powers in Asia, have boundary dispute. They don't agree on the boundary. The relation was of Hindi-Chini Bhai, means Indian and China are brothers. That was in 1950s. They had a war in 1962, and they have a contested relation ever since. How is Tibet relevant? Tibet is relevant because I would argue that both India and China are fighting over territories that belong neither to China nor to India, but belong to Tibet. But once Tibet becomes part of China according to international law, because of international law in recent times has recognized Chinese sovereignty, there were parts of Tibet that India had occupied. Now India is in a very awkward position. They will say that the parts that we occupy belongs to us, but Tibet is part of China. So they're in a very contradictory kind of position. So I looked at that in my own work, and I looked at the ways in which, for instance, from early 1950s, when there was camaraderie, that fraternal kind of relation, they entered into a situation of conflict. And the reality is, and some of you would follow Asian politics now, that they're unlikely to have a very cooperative relation in the coming years, and you'd have more competitive relations. There was an agreement that India and China made in 1954. This agreement is the basis of the foreign policy of both the countries. And they say it's non-interference. The agreement was agreement between China and India around trade and intercourse between Tibet region of China and India. This is the last international treaty where Tibet is mentioned. So Tibet is at the heart of this agreement. And yet, ever since, if you look at the writings of Indian scholars, Chinese scholars, they'll not even recognize that Tibet was part and parcel of it. So through my own work, what I wanted to do was look at the impact of the disappearance of traditional Tibetan state, which operated on different principles, including principle of reincarnation. I'm not going to go into that here, right? Principle of reincarnation. From there, how Tibet becomes a victim of modernization, where two post-colonial states, one revolutionary communist and one secular democratic, but both claiming to be post-colonial, both claiming to be victims of Western imperialism and also Japanese imperialism in case of China, how both post-colonial states fight over territory that never belonged to them. So you see the language of proprietorship was there, who does the territory belong to? But around this time, again, another thing happened which shifted the ways in which I tried to engage with various ideas, and it was around largely my outrage over what happened in Kashmir, the Indian occupied Kashmir. This is February 2013, so I can blame the Indian government for this, because I was going somewhere, I had sort of a semi-sabbatical, where I was going to focus on my border dispute book. And I was going to India around that time, and in February, India or Indian government hanged a Kashmiri person, right? So hanged the person and sent the information to the wife of that person through speed post. So they did not even bother to call, they did not even bother to do anything, they just sent it by speed post. And of course, the wife would have found out through television. So that sheer contempt, sheer arrogance that the Indian state had around Kashmir was shocking. It was shocking to those of us who would not buy into the narrative of Indian nation state, of course. But there were also Indians who celebrated that. So for me, therefore, it was around, this is the time when I remember writing on Facebook about it. And then I had more and more Kashmiri friends becoming friends on Facebook, and then I learned more and more. And I said, I see myself as a progressive person. That's how I saw myself. I never saw myself as an Indian nationalist in that strong sense, never in any serious sense. But even I was not fully aware of what was happening in Kashmir. We had colleagues who worked on Kashmir, we had events on Kashmir, but I didn't fully understand the various ways in which Indian state would occupy not only the territory, but the bodies of people. So since 2013, I've engaged with Kashmir in various ways, and that's largely through visits. It's not a research project as such, it's not. It's more of a personal engagement, let me put it this way. Right? What we find is Kashmir is a police state. So Indian occupied Kashmir is a police state. Everything is controlled there, and yet people resist. Right? But the ways in which the claim of India that Kashmir is an integral part of India, that's what the claim is. Integral part would imply that without Kashmir, India cannot exist. So whether Kashmiris like it or not, Kashmir is part of India. Something similar to what the Chinese would do with Tibet. Whether Tibetans like it or not, they have been liberated. Even if Tibetans are opposed, too bad. You could see the commonality, the coloniality later, right? But the ways in which the Indian colonization of Kashmir functions is not only the control over territories, but control over bodies. There have been around 80,000 people who have been killed. There are tens of thousands who have been tortured. There have been thousands of people, mostly women, who have been raped. There are women and men both who have been victims of sexual violence. There are 8,000 to 10,000 Kashmiris who have been forcibly disappeared. Right? There are people who have been blinded consciously by the state. So this is the kind of state we are dealing with. Right? So again, Parveen Anga, she had come to our university in the past, and she's going to come to our university again in summer next year. We're going to invite her. Her son was one of the first persons to be disappeared. That was on 18th August 1990. She's still waiting for her son, but what she did was she mobilized more and more parents and families who had lost their family members, and they meet every month and they do a vigil asking the state a very simple question: bring back our son, or bring back our child, or bring back our husband. Those kind of things, right? So they do that. But clearly the way in which Indian colonization functions is through the control over Kashmiri bodies. So these are the work I've been doing, and I have not written anything scholarly on Kashmir so far, because it will take time. But the way I would fix, and I wanted to make sense of various things I've done is, and again, this is something I haven't thought in the process. I may change in few months, I mean few days, who knows, I change a lot. Right? It's about queering post-colonial, because if post-colonial studies cannot recognize the colonial practices of post-colonial states, and they don't, then there's a problem with post-colonial studies. Because post-colonial studies have been quite good at looking at the colonial and the continuing colonial practices of West. They have been good at that, right? So a lot of focus is on how Western ideas continue to shape the contemporary realities in the world. But they hardly look at the ways in which non-Western colonization continues in the world today. And we could look at non-Western colonization in different ways. So this is a problem with post-coloniality. Post-coloniality, in my view, should not be about how the West has shaped the world. Yes, it's very much part and parcel of it, but the ways in which coloniality is, so the ways in which coloniality continues in contemporary world, where the West as well as non-Western powers are colonial, right? Now, I remember I checked this book, Post-Colonial, Queer, because of course, when you look at the works done on post-colonial queer, both in general, there are exceptions, in general, they are seen as different. So you have got one of the important figures of post-colonial theory, Fanon, quite homophobic, when you pay attention to his work. Most people do not look into that. Homophobic in the sense that, of course, for him, anything that doesn't conform to heterosexuality is influence of the West. And that is quite common. You go back, think of Mugabe, right? Go back to various leaders in different parts of so-called post-colonial world. You find them blaming the West for everything that's going wrong in terms of sexuality. And of course, there's also critique around homo-nationalism. The ways in which LGBTQ movement in the West often takes this mantle that we know what liberation is, gay liberation is, and we will tell the non-West what gay liberation should be. Now, of course, I reject homo-nationalism, I reject what's pinkwashing, but I also reject a lazy post-coloniality which cannot recognize the post-colonial countries and post-colonial powers as also colonizing. So I would therefore argue, and this is the work I'm doing, is the ways in which we can queer post-coloniality. Right? And that's about a department, but express yourself politically. So it is very much about politics. We have to start with queering the self. Queering the self is not only about recognizing that, let's say, heterosexism is wrong. I assume all of you know that heterosexism is wrong. I'm not talking heterosexuality. You can be heterosexual but not heterosexist. Because, and I say that in my class, that the difference between heterosexuality and heterosexism is the difference between sexuality and sexism. One is bigotry and one is something else. So first and foremost, it has to start with queering the self. It is about challenging heterosexism. It is about challenging heteronormativity. But it's also challenging the divide between simply hetero and homo, as if these are the two things. Queer politics is not only about how LGB and sometimes T people should be like the straight people. So there is always almost a movement, and when you look at the marriage, in the same-sex marriage debate, there's almost a movement to unqueer the queer. And that's how it can unqueer the queer. Because if you have right-wing, bigoted, privileged, classed, gay men becoming misogynist, some of them are, or some of them turning Islamophobic, that is quite unqueer in my own view. Right? So the way I would see queer is about challenging the ways in which identity is imposed upon us, various identities, and trying to have a more liberating notion of identity. It is about challenging the ways in which identity is a trap, identity is violent, and identity discourses inscribe the violence of our own bodies. So queering the self, therefore, is about challenging those notions. It's about challenging privileges, because most of us would have one or the other privilege, right? So in them, challenging privilege. Queer politics is not only about talking of LGBTQ people. It is also about challenging other forms of prejudices, other forms of Islamophobia, racism, misogyny, various other things. So queering the self, therefore, is about challenging bigotry in all ways, in different ways. But once you challenge the self, the individual self, you also realize, and you queer the self, that you also queer the nation. Because the idea of nation is based on the self and the othering. Collective self and the collective othering. And once you recognize that collective self and the collective othering is based on exclusion of the other, violent exclusion of the other, negative representation of the other, dehumanization of the other, then you realize that if you queer yourself, then you also queer the nation. So you cannot have a queer nation. It's an oxymoron. Or you can have a queer nation which is anti-national. You have to be anti-national in order to have a queer nation. Therefore, queering the self goes hand in hand, individual self goes hand in hand with queering the collective self. And recognizing that all these identities, collective identities, are inscribed through violence, all these identities are inscribed through exclusions and inclusions. And it's connected to also decolonizing the state, decolonizing the mind. The way in which we can decolonize the state is first decolonize ourselves. So for those of us who, let's say, be privileged or be stated, not stateless. Be stated means those who have states, those who have citizenship, those who have, those who have comfort of having passports. There are many who wouldn't have comfort of passport. If you're stateless, you're refugees. Important thing is to decolonize the state of the mind. And to start that, again, if we queer ourselves, we queer the nation, we recognize that contemporary condition, we have to sort of, we have to acknowledge the coloniality of the contemporary, but not affirm it. Acknowledge, not affirm. And there's a difference between the two. We have to acknowledge that coloniality continues, but we don't need to affirm it, in fact we need to challenge it. So that is about challenging the state of the mind. And again, if looking at myself, I'm sure in my own ways, I will be complicit with forms of colonization of India and Kashmir over time, but it took a lot of labor, a lot of effort to challenge myself, challenge the nation, and we have to, in a sense, have that. So a progressive politics necessarily needs to decolonize the mind. And by the way, again, this kid, there was a Muzammil Rathir. He's one of the important person who inspired me to start looking at Kashmir, because I had seen his picture in a magazine. He had been blinded by the state, and I often couldn't forget about that, and I wanted to know what happens to people, victims, once the news is gone, when they're out of the news. I went and found out that, of course, it's a life changed, not only his life, but the life of the family has changed. Now, but it's not enough to decolonize ourselves. It's not enough to be radical ourselves within and say, look, now I'm not complicit with colonization. It's important for us to speak out. Speak out again and again in every forum possible. But the reality is, It's a state that controls the people. So we need to therefore critique the state, we need to challenge the state, and we need to seek to decolonize the mind of the state. So we always would have a situation where querying the political would necessarily imply querying the post-colonial states and reminding the people of that state and reminding the state that they are actually colonial and they have to decolonize. So we need to work towards decolonization. And again, there are different forums in which we do. It's easy for me to find pictures, so I'm using the pictures, but I've worked on largely Tibet and Kashmir, but there's no reason why, and this is the problem often where we have solidarity. I don't mean to say that we can have equal solidarity with everyone or that we can have equal knowledge of everyone. We can't. But it does imply that we have to be consistent around the principles. If the principle is of decolonization, if the principle is of queering, if the principle is of freedom, justice or whatever, then we cannot support one kind of colonization and oppose other kind of colonization. Right? But it also includes intolerance. I know I have middle finger there, so you can ignore it if you find it impolite. Because while we are having deliberation and discussion, there are certain lines that we have to draw. So for instance, I would draw the line that I would not tolerate fascists. I know I shouldn't say that if we have students who are flirting with fascist ideas, I hope not, I have not met any students so far, then I'll be polite, I'll respect them, and hopefully through education will transform them. Right? But in general, we have to be intolerant towards fascists, because the reality is the fascists will be intolerant towards us. So this liberal, or rather lazy liberal notion that, oh, let's listen to them, let's engage with them, let's work with them, would not work because they would not listen to you. Right? So that's how it functions. They might function through divide and rule. They might function through those ideas that, okay, let's focus on Muslims first, queer people later, and then we deal with queers later, and then women third, or whatever. That's how they'll function. But we have to be intolerant, and through my own work, I try to be as intolerant of fascism as possible in various ways. Right? But the reality is, I'm also aware of my own limitations. I recall self-immolation of Tibetans. Tibetans are protesting through self-immolation. And I knew that my work is useless, frankly. I can't do anything to prevent that from happening. Because the reality is I don't matter, you don't matter, we don't matter. They were protesting because they were victims of Chinese colonization. And whatever we do, including, let's say, even the Western countries, forget me or you, Western countries, it would have very little impact on China. So when we had that, I could sense despair. But I also could see in terms of shame. Shame because not only, let's say, people in Tibet studies, China studies, and academia, even myself, we would be quite self-censorious when it came to China. So the kind of things we'll not tolerate in the West, we'll tolerate when it came to China. So I was quite shameful of that. So in a sense, my own politics I could see was connected to the silencing in the West around human rights in Tibet. Right? Around that time, of course, so I had that, so I was very much aware. So it was partly despair and shame, and I still have that because I do know that beyond a point I do not make much difference. But it's also been inspired by the ideas of justice and freedom. Now, of course, you may say which concept of justice, which theories of justice, frankly, I don't know. I don't. For me, these are terms that I'm appropriating based on what I experience vis-a-vis activists, vis-a-vis people who are struggling for it. I do not have a particular theoretical framework through which I could understand it, but I do know that these concepts, even if they're liberal concepts, and we could have a radical position on these liberal concepts, the reality is people are giving life, people are struggling for, and people's lives are being taken away around justice and freedom. And these are values that we have to cherish. Not George W. Bush kind of freedom, by the way, but other kinds of freedom. I try my best, I'm trying my best. Partly, remember, it's also normative. It's not what I do, but what also I want to do. Partly, I'm inspired through the ideas of compassion. And this is where the role of Dalai Lama and Karmapa becomes relevant. I try to be compassionate. I try because I have not managed to do it. Maybe once I manage, then I'll be finished. My life will be over. But I try. And one thing I try my best, and I say it doesn't work always, is to realize that, and I'll quote from a particular sutra, is even if someone in whom I have high expectations from helping them in the past were to senselessly harm me, may I regard them as my genuine teacher. And this is a reality. I have learned as much as from those who have helped me. I've learned from you, but I've also learned from those who have betrayed me, who have abused me, who have backbited about me, or who have ignored me. So in a sense, I have learned from all of them. I'm trying to learn, not to learn, right? And the reality is, I should say sorry to various people, but I'll not name anyone, I'll not name things. But I would have failed you. I would have done things I shouldn't have done, right, at various points in time. So I do want to apologize to you. Know anyway why I would be apologizing to you. And again, because this is something, I'm partly including it mainly because of the students. Some of you are here. Some of you will be struggling with various health issues, mental health issues. And it's important that we speak out. Around 2013, this is before I became head of department, around the time of self-immolation by Tibetans, I myself suffered from severe depression. I couldn't get it treated here in England thanks to the NHS and everything, and then thanks to the privileges my family had, I could get treated more easily in India during my visit. So that's the thanks part, but leave it. Depression. But the reality is I overcame it. And that's the reality. But depression partly taught me to be humble about people. It taught me that we all struggle. Because before that I was rather arrogant about, without knowing by the way. I thought I'm a decent person, but I was quite arrogant about others who I thought were failing in doing certain things. I saw it as a failure rather than as something else. It was about, and I affirmed myself. So one positive thing about depression was I realized and acknowledged that I'm queer. And that was for me freedom. I can't tell you I've never been more free than that. So being for 38 years of my life, that's the age by the way, 38 years of my life, thinking that I'm someone different. And then acknowledging it and affirming it. And that to me was a journey I took. And that is not so much intellectual thing, but it is intellectual very much, but it's also personal. And for me, personal and intellectual go hand in hand. Affirmation helped me. So I'm inspired, or rather I'm prompted also by love. Love is important. I love the work I do. And I'm not saying it because we have got the Chancellor here, the Deputy Chancellor, or the Dean, or the heads here. Frankly, that's not the case. Because I had these slides even before knowing who's going to turn up here. I love the work I do. That's the reality. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been here. And again, but I could be, oh, I actually love you all. Right? This is on a plane. Of course, the risk with love is Chinese mobile, no guarantee. Love often doesn't work. So for instance, this image. I lost my laptop. This is the last image of that laptop. I think I had too much of gin and tonic. I was happy. I felt I was, but I was happy not because I was actually in love with anyone. I was happy because I was coming back from Turkey after a trip. It was a student trip. I felt very good about it. I felt good about our students. I felt good about myself. I felt good about my colleagues. So I felt good about being an academic. So that's what I was writing. So I had too much of gin and tonic. I left my laptop in British Airways. I never got it back. And the loss was not so much a laptop. The loss was 3 chapters of mine from the Border Dispute book, which I had not saved anywhere. They went. Partly. Now, you can, but why didn't I save? Because this is what we say to others. You should save. But I'm writing such perfect chapter. So just let me wait. And I could never get it back because I had not switched on the iCloud and everything. Right. So going back to this, the love has no guarantee. So, caution, always save your work. But as an academic, I do recognize that see, when I try to be different, I don't want to be different. I don't judge others, by the way. I always respect different kinds of people doing different kinds of work. I do continue writing, so not the multiple copies of the same books. I have not written that many things, but I have written fair bits. Not in recent times, I can blame my head of department role for that, but I have been writing academic work. It's important. So with all the works and the speeches I gave on Kashmir, for instance, I do know that long term, what may matter slightly is how knowledge is produced on Kashmir. And knowledge production is largely still within academia. So we need to continue to write as scholars. I'll do that. Right? But it's also through conferences. I have learned through conferences. I remember this conference in this 2010 before actually I found out about Kashmir, and we had colleagues right there. I mean, I learned a lot from there. So, and this is one of the many conferences we have done here. I didn't know anything about albinism, frankly, but we had a colleague approach saying that a student wanted to organize an event. We organized an event, and the first London symposium took place earlier this year. I learned a lot about the ways in which albinism continues in the society, the ways in which it's around bigotry. So I'm just giving a sample of the ways in which I have, and hopefully many of you, I'm sure I'm speaking for many of you here, we learn not only by reading books, not only through reading articles, not only writing articles that are, or books that are referable, but we learn mostly through everyday life, right? So in that sense, university enables us to provide and provides us that with that space. But Since 2013, I've been speaking more and more in forums outside the university, outside academia, right? So in terms of activism and other forums. And I said, it's very difficult, it's not that easy, because you have to speak in a language which is slightly different. But I think I enjoy it. As Roland pointed out, Facebook, right? These are two images I have taken. Facebook. So Facebook has helped me a lot. In fact, the sad part is that I'm sharing it with you. Sometimes I have to go on Facebook, write my ideas, save it as with the only me, no one else can see it, and then copy it on the Word document. Because I have learned, or rather have had that habit of having more free thought on Facebook than on Word document. I've learned that. But Facebook is not only, it's not liberating, by the way. Yeah, through Facebook I knew a lot about Kashmir, Tibet and other contexts, Kurdish issues and other things, but Facebook is also something that is about surveillance, it's about censorship. I'm giving an example from last year when a number of us were writing around Kashmir and we were censored by Facebook saying that it's against, and you could it's against community standards. The reality was there was nothing against community standards because later they did apologize. They apologized because Guardian, Al Jazeera and others covered because it was censorship by Facebook on views on Kashmir. Now when it was Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg planning it, which is unlikely, but you never know. He wants good business in India and China, so he's capable of doing that. Or let's say nationalist Indians working in Facebook, we wouldn't know, but it was taking place. But it is also about remembering of trolling, the abuses, the questionings we get. So I'm not going to read out to you, but essentially, though I'm very open about my queer identity, what we have is still people referring to my mother, sister, and other, I'm not going to show worse ones, abuses. And of course, if a male identified person like me gets these kind of abuses, then you can imagine what happens to female identified people and intellectuals. It's much worse. So we have to bear in mind that social media is not only liberating, but can be quite abusive too. So you have to get used to those things. The reality is, whatever we do in our life, we have to always work hard, and we have to have hope, because without hope we can't do much. Now, who do I not thank? Because I was not sure how to thank people, who not to thank. That's the reality. So still I don't know. So I don't want to name people who I'm thanking, so I thought it's odd. But I wanted to thank of course, I can thank everyone in the world, but I do have only a few minutes. And this him after this, we have to rush out. I wanted to thank, of course, my family and parents, my mom. Most important, my family is quite big, by the way, so I should thank everyone, and they have been very supportive, but my mom in particular, I'm close to her. Anyway, my supervisor, PhD supervisor and PhD supervisors, my colleagues, a friend of mine who has been with me and a comrade for 20 years, my colleagues, so I would thank every one of you. I would also like to thank those of you who trusted me and got me here 10 years ago, those of you who wanted me to continue as head of department or whatever, and of course, those academics who reminded me that being an academic is not only about research, it's also about students. It needed your effort to shift me slightly by that, right? And of course, I said, this is why I wanted to thank university. This university did provide me with the kind of space I would want, right? And this is, I'll not say who gave it to me, but imagine someone senior to me wrote, disobedience is the true foundation of liberty. That's a postcard they gave it to me. So if I am disobedient, they can blame themselves for it. Now, going back to diversity, because our university is the most diverse, one of the most diverse in the world, and we want it to continue. Of course, when you look at the structure of the university, it's like a pyramid. Diversity keeps getting reduced as you go up. But my hope is that whatever changes are taking place in this university, it will take diversity seriously and not like a tick pocket side. So I have trust in the university to do that. So it has provided the space. And again, it was supposed to be, by the way, part of Black History Month celebration. And I was supposed to have a different topic slightly, but I didn't. But the reality is, I've learned as much from my colleagues, academic colleagues, as from non-academic colleagues, from people who are connected to me through my BME staff network, for instance, right? Students, and it's quite easy to thank students, but the reality is that it's a very radical proposition. Students do matter. Students matter not only because they pay fees, by the way, and you do pay fees. Students matter for university. But for us as, let's say, academics and public intellectuals, you should matter. And that's a radical proposition, because there would be many academics who would not take you seriously, for instance, who would see you as people, okay, we have to teach you, but that's it. For me, a lot of learning and education was via students. Finishing, and this is me. The reality is, I find it quite easy to deal with and educate students. or not educate, again, educate by students and educate students. And the biggest challenge I had was, this is my native place in India, where I had to speak to kids who are between 4 years to 8 years. But how do I make sense to them when they don't even speak English that well? How does one inspire? But I had to use various things, and I don't know whether I succeeded or not, but I don't think I failed there. That's what I know. Now, and this is my second slide, I think. Yeah. So, baby is the baby, Rashid. Rashid is a Kashmiri kid. His family is victim of enforced disappearance. So when I think, and I'm sure all of you will have those questions, when we think of what do we do, I mean, why do we do research? Why do we exist as intellectuals? Why do we exist as scholars, teachers, whatever? We have to always have our own idea of why do we do it. For me, I always bear him in mind, because I remember I had to make one off conversation, not conversation because he wouldn't understand me, but I remember speaking to him saying, Azadi. Azadi means freedom in Kashmiri, and in Urdu, right? In Urdu, sorry. I spoke to him, I said, would you like to be Azad? Would you like Azadi? He smiled. Now, of course, the reason I mention this is because I would often have his face in mind, him as a baby, not now, I don't know how he's changed now, him as a baby, to say that, does our work, does it make a difference to the wider world? So we have to come up with our own things, right? We have to have our own questions. What drive us? Why are we academics? Why are we scholars? Why are we professors? Why are we whatever? We have to have that. That's important. And I'll conclude with this, saying that for me, I've found my answer so far is that through my own work, I want to look at decolonizing the states, creating their nation. For that, I would urge, I know I'm urging myself, but I'm urging you. Hopefully all of you, I welcome you all to become queer. Be queer, right? Be queer and be free. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dibyesh, and I'm sure you're all very pleased that Dibyesh did not follow my advice of reading out a boring academic paper, and has given this brilliant, eloquent, fluent, visually very exciting presentation, and we've gone through a journey through many different parts of the world, Tibet, Kashmir, border regions of India and China, and we've been through a personal history, a personal life, and how the personal and the activist and the intellectual have combined together in the work of Dibyesh. And I think it is really a great moment in which we can celebrate his achievements that he's had over his long career, not only in Westminster but also earlier in Bath and elsewhere. We are going to continue with one tradition, however, is that we do not have a question and answer session now. The advantage of that is that we can have that question and answer, and you can see and talk to Dibyesh individually with a drink in the foyer just outside of in the university foyer. I think you would have got a sense from the speech that the lecture that Dibyesh has given, the degree to which he is a charismatic, dynamic leader, teacher, supporter, empathizer with students, and the ways in which you can see that to be in politics and international relations with Dibyesh is a very exciting and eventful journey that our students take. And an expression of this is a couple of our students here are going to give a small token of their appreciation for all his hard work. Well, thank you all for coming to this event. If you do have time, please do join us for drinks and to say a few words to Dibyesh if you can catch him. So just follow outside, and then it's just at the foyer of the university there will be drinks available there. And there are also continuing events that will be taking place, and you can pick up leaflets regarding that. And thank you very much. And a final thank you to Dibyesh.